Catherine can get whoever's speaking, like Upper Mississippi River Region
Start over.
Interleague. Okay, we're recording, so I have to repeat
Yeah.
myself. I'm Mary Ellen Miller, and I'm chair of the League of Women Voters, Upper Mississippi River Region, ILO, affectionately called UMR. We cover 5 states in the Upper Mississippi River region. That's Missouri, who's recently joined us, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. We are also a member of the Mississippi River Network, which covers all 10 states bordering the river. Our focus is water quality as league members, but we also focus on, more recently, water quantity, which is becoming a secondary concern. Tonight, we're going to hear from 3 wonderful experts on this issue of carbon sequestration pipelines, CO2 pipelines, that are crossing over 3 of our states. A big concern in terms of the impact that that does have on water quality. You'll hear more about that from each of them, but understand that producing and capturing CO2 from ethanol plants, that alone takes a lot of water. Ethanol plants take a lot of water. And so it's a natural issue for us to be concerned about. So glad you're all here. And I'm going to just briefly introduce each speaker before they start. We will have all 3 of our people do their presentations, and then we'll open it up to questions. You can put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll cover those in the last 30 minutes. This is being recorded. It will be put on our UMR website. You are free to use it for your local leagues at no cost to anybody. So let's start off with Peg Fershong from Minnesota. Peg joined CURE, Clean Up the River Environment, in August of 2012. And she's currently working on constituent engagement, leading CURE's Water Democracy Program and organizing their work around carbon pipeline resistance. Peg has a big background in environmental issues. She's worked on programs surrounding the Tallgrass Prairie, has hosted freshwater mussel field days along the river, and is a natural in terms of being concerned about our water. She's also done a lot of work in trails and parks. She was born in Montana and is a transplant to Minnesota. So Peg, take it over.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Hang on just a second. We thought we had this fixed, but it's not working like we thought.
Okay. We'll just wait until we get through this little technical part. There we go.
Are you seeing the big screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. Good evening. I want to welcome you. Thank you for choosing to learn more about why we oppose CO2 pipeline projects. As was stated, my name is Peg Fershong, and I'm the director of programs here at CURE. I live just north of the Minnesota River, pictured here. In addition to working with the team at CURE opposing these projects, I'm also a landowner in the path of the Summit Carbon Solutions proposed project. We have a robust agenda tonight with 3 presenters, but I'm going to start out with a brief overview of the CCUS process and talk a little bit about the Summit Carbon Pipeline proposal for Minnesota. In the League's recent email advertising this webinar, there was a CO2 Pipelines 101 video that CURE put together to give you the basics about CO2 pipelines. But if you're like me, you might not have had time to review the video in preparation. So I'm going to go over a few quick points. Here you can see that the intent to capture CO2 at the source, such as an ethanol plant or a natural gas plant, is once it's captured, the gas is compressed, it's distilled and chilled, and it's changed from a gas to what they call a critical phase liquid state. And then it's put into a highly pressurized pipeline and transported for sequestering. In this image, you can see that the CO2 is stored underground, but it is also then later, it's often leads to enhanced oil recovery. As you can see in the picture, it's transported and it's stored, but then when they put it in the ground, depending on where they put it, it pushes the oil up in marginal oil wells and makes it more accessible for extraction. And so once the oil comes back out of the ground, it negates the whole benefit of greenhouse gas emission reduction. Here on the right is a map of the Midwest Carbon Solutions, Midwest Carbon Express, the Summit Carbon Solutions project. They claim once it's built, it'll be the world's largest CO2 pipeline. The footprint covers 5 states and approximately 2,000 miles. With the anchors being 30 plus ethanol plants in the region, Minnesota will have about 240 plus miles over 11 counties and encompassing 6 ethanol plants. The Navigator project in Minnesota was very small. It was a lateral branch in southern Minnesota, I think approximately 12 miles. But back in October, this project was canceled. The industry narrative would like you to believe that CO2 pipelines are a local concern, when in fact, we know that for the last 20 plus years, the industry has been moving behind the scenes to lay the groundwork for what you see here. This is a map which is approximately 85,000 miles of CO2 pipeline infrastructure that the industry is hoping to have operational by 2045. They, the industry, are claiming that the infrastructure is needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, when in fact, we know the only thing this infrastructure is going to do is extend the life of the fossil fuel industry. In all honesty, the only way we're going to have meaningful reductions of greenhouse gas emissions is to change behaviors and eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels. In this map, you'll see the red shaded areas are existing oil and gas fields. The blue shaded areas are saline reservoirs. Note that if you're looking at where Minnesota is, we cannot really sequester CO2 with this technology because you need saline reservoir areas or caverns in order to successfully sequester the CO2 that's proposed in this project. Some have argued that we should repurpose existing petroleum pipelines for CO2. This really doesn't work for a variety of reasons. The primary reason being that CO2 is highly corrosive and the petroleum infrastructure cannot handle the corrosive nature of CO2, and that these pipelines are highly pressurized, about 2.5 times that of natural gas and petroleum pipelines. CO2 pipeline development has been driven by the fossil fuel industry for primarily enhanced oil recovery. We know this to be true in the case of Summit, as their first large public investor was Harold Hamm of Continental Resources, a large petroleum company that's based in North Dakota and Oklahoma, and they invested $250 million into this infrastructure project. Why should everyday people be concerned about these projects? Well, honestly, CO2 is an asphyxiant. It's what the meatpacking plant industry uses to euthanize animals. And when CO2 mixes with water, as I said earlier, it creates carbonic acid and is highly corrosive. The industry likes to tout that there have been no fatalities due to CO2 failures in recent history. But back in February of 2020 in Satartia, Mississippi, there was a rupture. It was in a rural community of about 350 people, and 45 people were transported to multiple facilities within a 100-mile radius of Satartia. Because how many ICU beds are in your rural communities of any size? The closest town to us is about 3,200 people or population. And our hospital has 1 ICU bed and 2 ER rooms. CCUS allows for a new fossil fuel business model. And if you look at this model, this is what you can continue to do. You can continue to burn oil, coal, natural gas, or other greenhouse gas emitting things that such as corn ethanol. You can continue to invest in infrastructure that claims to capture carbon at the expense of taxpayers. You can continue to build thousands of miles of pipeline to transport captured carbon that destroys ecosystems, jeopardizes ground and surface water, creates hazards for communities and wildlife, again, at the expense of the public. You can continue to use the majority of captured carbon to increase oil US production through enhanced oil recovery. You can continue to collect tax credits for every ton of carbon captured with no guarantee that the carbon or the CO2 will actually stay in the ground long term. Make no mistake, carbon pipelines do not solve the greenhouse gas problems. We need to change consumer use. CO2 and CCUS has never been successful at the proposed scale, and the US government has been funding it for more than a decade. The only way it makes sense for the polluters to do this is with taxpayer money. The Summit project is to the tune of $4 to $6 million annually in their profit expectations. This is not a public project. Make no mistake, it is a private for-profit industry making money on the backs of taxpayers and frontline rural communities. Rural communities and landowners take all the risk. We've had a tremendous response against this project in Minnesota. The bottom right corner of your screen is a photo from a community meeting in Lamberton, Minnesota, where we had over 200 people and standing room only at the American Legion in January of this past year. People were eager to learn more about this project. CURE first learned about this project in the fall of 2021 by reading the minutes of a local county commissioner meeting in an area newspaper. The minutes reflected a presentation by Summit on their proposed project. Above are the highlights we went through in the regulatory process in Minnesota that are worth noting. Because this was the first of its kind CO2 project in the entire upper Midwest, many government agencies were at a standstill because it was unclear who had oversight or jurisdiction of the project. Summit was aiming for the path of least resistance, so they were looking to start with rural communities, local and county governments, for oversight, but CURE wanted to see state and federal oversight. Even determining what type of project this would be was a question. Would it be an agriculture project, a pipeline project, an energy project, a transmission project, or a waste project? No one really knew, and each of the labels correlated with a different state agency and different rules for oversight and governing. Furthermore, we also learned that while the EPA and several other states classified CO2 as a hazardous liquid, Minnesota did not. Another strategy by the industry is to break up the project or phase the project. Since 2021, Summit has clearly communicated to the entire world the footprint of their project in Minnesota, all 40 plus miles of it. But they only applied for an application on a short lateral branch in the northern part of the geography, which was a 28.5 mile branch in Ottertail and Wilkin County. And when you go through the environmental review process on such a small section of a project, it's difficult to prove cumulative impacts of the entire project. Furthermore, we were not able to introduce any arguments, introduce any information, or argue elements of the project that were not specifically in the 28 miles, even though the entire proposed project for Minnesota was 240 miles. This left our hands tied. As we see here in this slide, this is just a rough glance at what we think the timeline will be moving forward as it is dictated through state procedural timelines. So it could fluctuate depending on what happens as we move forward. So as we look at additional environmental harms, we're going to talk about ecosystems and water. When we think about our ecosystem, for hundreds of years, if something happened to disrupt an ecosystem, time would allow the natural world to heal herself. Take a tree, for instance. If a branch or bark comes off, it would just heal and regrow. As we have had human contact, industrialization, and economic interests emerge, our ecosystem is not rebounding like she once did. All one has to do is look at the climate crisis to realize that we are overburdening the world with environmental harms. In Minnesota, our natural heritage of water, outdoor spaces, and wildlife is all at risk. Historically, Minnesota was considered a natural carbon bank. Tallgrass prairie, wetlands, bogs, old growth forests. Much are impaired or completely gone now. The tallgrass prairie is one of the most endangered ecosystems. And in Minnesota, we once were almost 65% tallgrass prairie, and we now have less than 1% of tallgrass prairie. There's a lot of glacial till that presents unique problems with drilling and excavating. With the wetlands, we have a complex underground water system naked to the eye. It is very unclear what a rupture would do to our fresh drinking water supply. Being located in the middle of the continent, we're also keenly aware that industrial markets from Canada and Mexico have an interest or a stake in this infrastructure. As this process unfolds, we have learned more and more about the amount of water carbon capture process will need. First of all, corn is already water intensive. It currently takes 3.5 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of ethanol. Add carbon capture to the mix, and it increases the demand of water 7 gallons to 1. Not only that, the whole public narrative, supposedly of reducing carbon emissions, does not account for the water use or the fact that converting CO2 gas to a liquid not only takes more water, but it also takes more energy than it actually takes to make ethanol.
Peg, I'm just going to remind you of 5 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you account for the entire cradle to grave process, clearly it does not lower the carbon footprint. Lastly, I want to emphasize that currently there is no modeling available if there is a rupture or it hits a moving waterway. In Minnesota, it crosses multiple waterways. Furthermore, we have no idea if the rupture happens in the winter, what the damage will be if the CO2 gets trapped underneath an ice cap and the water is moving underneath. There will be no place for that gas to release. Normally, when a company needs water for their operation, they go through an appropriations process. Here in Minnesota, it would be the Minnesota DNR. But with the continued stresses on water, with all of the drought we are seeing across the country, there is a tiered process for appropriations. For instance, in Colorado, we saw companies trying to get water from municipalities because municipalities are first on the list for water. When we've already seen this in Minnesota, so far we know of, Summit has approached 3 different communities and/or water districts for water. As we move into the future, we need to understand the true cost of water and hold extractionist industries accountable and make them pay for the water that they use and clean the water they discharge. You would think this already happens. While in some places it may, it often does not happen in rural communities. We've been watching very closely what's been going on in Iowa, and the majority of our infrastructure runs to Iowa and connects on to the main trunk of the proposed pipeline that then goes to North Dakota. Minnesota and Iowa share multiple aquifers, remembering water does not respect artificial boundaries. In southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, we have what is called the karst region. The soils are very sandy and the aquifers are shallow. With drought conditions that we've had the last couple of years, many communities struggle to meet their current water needs. Many water management personnel are telling state authorities they don't have the water this pipeline needs to operate. 13 plants near the Iowa-Minnesota border have requested 500 million gallons of water per year. An Olympic-sized swimming pool holds 750,000 gallons of water. That would roughly be water to fill 58 Olympic-sized swimming pools annually. Another wild hair that is emerging on the horizon is finding places to put CO2 waste. The federal government is proposing that we sequester underground in our national parks and forest lands. In Minnesota, we have 2 national forests for consideration, the Superior National Forest and the Chippewa National Forest, both of which have tribal lands associated with them. Here in the green, you can see the forests, and in the pink, you can see the tribal lands of the Anishinaabe people. Sequestering requires special geological conditions in order for the process to work. Minnesota has significant amounts of mafic rock, and while we don't completely understand where this idea is headed, we wanted to get this on your radar tonight. We know this is worth considering because Talon Metal has received federal funding from the Department of Energy to do the research in this option. Minnesota has 4 of the 5 largest iron mines in the United States. Geographically, Minnesota forests are surrounded by several CO2 producing industries to be watching. Currently, our national forests are protected, but it does not mean in the future they will be. I know this has been a lot of information to leave you with, but I want to give you a couple takeaways that are important. Remember that CO2 is a risk to human health because we can be right in the middle of it without knowing it. It's odorless and colorless. It damages the ecosystem, and there will be no leak or spill like you see with petroleum-based products. It's highly pressurized, and it will be a rupture. Water and CO2 equal carbonic acid, and it's highly corrosive. You cannot repurpose current petroleum infrastructure for CO2 pipelines. A project like this desecrates treaty rights with our indigenous neighbors. CCUS only prolongs the life of the fossil fuel industry. The carbon intensity score analysis does not include cradle to grave analysis. We have limited amount of fresh drinking water, and we cannot give it to extractionist companies for profits. Lastly, think about Summit Carbon Solutions with the 30 plus ethanol plants they have currently contracted in this 5-state footprint. It's only going to sequester 9 million metric tons a year. It has the capacity for 18 million metric tons. And from the previous information, you'll know that other forms of CO2 come from cement, mining, and fertilizer companies, and they're much more egregious and harmful to human health and the environment. Things you can do as an informed citizen: you can remain a critical consumer of information. You can participate in action alerts, submit comments to your state public utility commissions, understand as a taxpayer that you're paying the polluters to continue to pollute, talk with lawmakers, and share information with your networks. I know that was really fast, but I just want to thank you for hanging in there with me.
I'll remind everyone, put your questions in the Q&A. Let me check right now. Yes. This is being recorded, and it will be on our UMR website, and it's available for anyone to download and rewatch, and you can also share it with your local leagues. Thank you, Peg. You're right. That's a lot of information to digest. I can find myself already thinking I'm going to have to go back and watch the whole thing again. Our next presenter is Jan Morris from Iowa. Jan lives in the very southwest corner of Iowa, Montgomery County, lives in Red Oak, where I was born. And she has became involved because one of these proposed pipelines is going right through Montgomery County, where she lives. She's been involved for the past 2 years with activating local people, doing what she sees as important in terms of sharing the information and encouraging activism at the state level. Welcome, Jan Norris.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Jan Norris from Montgomery County in southwest Iowa. I appreciate the opportunity to update you on the carbon pipelines. This evening, I am going to focus mostly on Iowa and the Summit Pipeline project. Pam is next and has more specifics on Illinois. More than 2 years ago, my neighbors all got certified letters in the mail notifying them of a potential carbon pipeline project. The Summit route is proposed to run between 2 of our farms and behind my house. Since then, I have devoted myself to learning all I could. The more I learn, the more concerned I become, and drives me to educate others. This is a photo taken during construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline in northern Iowa a few years ago. You can clearly see how construction damages our precious land. This looks more like a 4-lane highway than a pipeline trench. Sorry, my slides are not advancing. Why would that be? Anybody have a suggestion on why my slides aren't advancing? Okay, here we go. Okay, look closely at this map. You'll see the white boundaries of the Midwest states. 3 carbon pipeline routes proposed impacting the 6 states on this map. Purple is the Summit Carbon Solutions, blue is Navigator CO2 Ventures, and yellow is Wolf ADM. Summit is proposing approximately 2,000 miles across 5 states, starting in the east and terminating in North Dakota, where it is said to be sequestered because that pays the most in 45Q tax credits. But the CO2 could be used for enhanced oil recovery for a little less per ton. This is Navigator's original plan. Their phase 1 route is in solid green lines. Phase 2 is dotted Navigator. Navigator proposed starting out in the west and wanted to terminate in Illinois. Wolf's route is a little shorter, starting near Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and proposed to also sequester in Illinois. Pam will talk more about that in a minute. These 3 projects are just the beginning. At a hearing in Des Moines, the EPA panelist said there could be as many as 60,000 to 90,000 more miles of CO2 pipelines proposed in the United States. In fact, One Earth Energy has already added a proposal for a new 2-county CO2 pipeline in Illinois. A lot has happened recently, and I'll give you a quick overview, then let Pam discuss in more detail. Let's update Navigator first. In October, they officially canceled the project, citing the unpredictable nature of the regulatory and government process. The South Dakota Public Utilities Commission denied Navigator's permit, which led them to withdrawing in South Dakota, then in Illinois, and now Navigator has pulled their Iowa petition. Navigator is known to be lobbying in DC, and rumors are swarming. Summit, of course, would love to pick up Navigator's plants. However, their business models are very different, and it is being rumored Navigator's easements may have been sold to another entity. Landowners are reporting they have received letters from a company called Tenaska. Wolf, unlike the other 2 projects, says it will not use eminent domain to build their pipeline and will only obtain voluntary easements. They have withdrawn their Illinois application after the Commerce Commission staff recommended to deny it. Wolf intends to refile their application addressing concerns early next year. If you would like to learn more and live anywhere close to Tipton, Iowa, you can attend a concerned citizen meeting on Thursday night. Summit CEO Bruce Rastetter announced the launch of its planned CO2 pipeline project will be delayed 2 years. Initially planning to have the project operational in 2024, it has faced a number of setbacks, causing the delay. Of course, this is assuming permits from all the states are obtained. Summit in North Dakota some say that North Dakota should have been the easiest state to get permits, but the route was initially denied by their Public Service Commission. Summit was allowed to refile, and their new route is 13 miles longer, impacting 100 new parcels in 5 counties. A hearing will be held on December 21st to determine whether counties can implement local ordinances. At least 1 county has denied Summit's injection well permits. North Dakota Farm Bureau wants to participate in a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of governing the use of underground pore space, and an investigation into Summit's investors was requested, but declined by the North Dakota Attorney General. In South Dakota, Summit is having a tough go also. the Public Utilities Commission upheld existing county ordinances. Additional counties are considering establishing ordinances, but it is very important they are carefully considering for effectiveness and not just what Summit suggests. The Public Utilities Commission has initially denied Summit's route and told them to come back after working with communities and landowners. Summit claims to have heard them loud and clear and has even moved staff to Aberdeen to try and mend fences. In Iowa, Summit's evidentiary hearing with the Iowa Utilities Board started in August, where witnesses testified for 8 weeks. Never have I seen so many grown men moved to tears. Only landowners along the route who haven't signed easements were allowed to participate. Neighbors like me, tenants, and other parties were left out. Witness testimony can be watched on Bold, Nebraska's YouTube channel. Pre-file testimony was required, so only cross-examination was allowed verbally during the hearing. The public comment period scheduled by the former IUB chair was eliminated, and Summit waived their rebuttal at the end. The hearing has produced huge volumes of documentation, over 7,500 pages of transcripts, more than 650 hearing exhibits, and thousands of pages of pre-file testimony. Post-hearing briefs with a 150-page limit are due at the end of December. Parties have another 3 weeks to file 75-page reply briefs. Then the IUB will begin their deliberation and writing of the order. A spokesperson for the IUB says there is no deadline for a decision, but estimated early 2024. The board could grant the permit, grant it with modifications, or deny it. Summit has requested eminent domain as part of the permit. If approved, landowners who have refused to sign easements will have to go through the local condemnation process in their counties. Summit will also need additional permits in Iowa, but they have withdrawn 2 air quality permit applications, have only filed 2 DNR of the water permits of the 13 needed. They have not filed for wastewater or sovereign land permits. They will need Army Corps of Engineer permits for river crossings, and they will need local road crossing permits in each county. After the IUB makes their decision, whether granted or denied, the Summit permit decision is likely to be appealed. Summit has said in an interview that they would make changes and refile if denied. And if approved, Summit would wait for approvals in South and North Dakota before starting construction in Iowa, which could take more than a year. If approved, the Sierra Club and others are expected to file an appeal, and it could be tied up in court for years. We are seeing the same failures over and over again with these pipeline applications in states. Landowners are not properly contacted. The companies are refusing to file emergency response plan or plume modeling. New rules and specific to CO2 pipelines are still being written by PHMSA, and failure to meet the burden of proof, and they're unable to show contracts where the CO2 is coming from and where it will be sequestered. Recently, we have learned about the amount of water the CO2 capture process will require. Investigation has revealed 13 individual LLCs have been filed with the Iowa Secretary of State. 2 have filed for DNR water well permits, one for 55 million gallons a year and the other for 27 million. The first has been approved with what appears to be no real investigation on the DNR's part and is being appealed. The second is currently pending review, and the hearing was well attended. As we know, Iowa's drought is a huge concern. This next legislative session in Iowa is likely to see more activity with pipeline-associated legislation. More legislators have been paying attention or filed to intervene. We would like to see pressure to pass property right protections and clarify jurisdictional control. We will need to encourage all of our partners to get involved and lobby with us. So who exactly is working for Iowans? It is concerning that so many in our government do not seem to be doing their job. The DNR issued a water permit without establishing the required new beneficial use category. An open records request discovered internal emails where they admitted not understanding. The Office of Consumer Advocate is supposed to be representing Iowans' interests in utility cases. However, the governor's reorganization bill this spring and a change in staff The OCA testified that they did not know the water usage issue until the hearing. They did not conduct any economic analysis of the pipeline benefits, nor did they make any determination of whether these projects meet public convenience or necessity. Leadership at the state Senate refused to bring the bill the House passed up in subcommittee, and since the replacement of 2 of the 3 IUB members by Governor Reynolds this spring, the board has fast-tracked the schedule. In Iowa, Shelby County has been out front in protecting its citizens' interests. Their supervisor chair put together a list of things he wished he had known 2 years ago to share with counties and other states who are just starting the process. Summit must file for road crossing permits in every county in Iowa. Some savvy counties have examined and updated their policies to ensure better oversight and reconsidered fee structures to recoup county expenses. Some counties even told Summit to wait to file applications until they have an IUB permit in their hand. PHMSA is a federal regulatory agency recognized after investigating the Cetacea, Mississippi accident that pipeline rules specific to CO2 are necessary. They are drafting new regulatory standards and anticipate the first draft to be out next year. This fall, PHMSA issued a letter of clarification saying, quote, local governments have broad powers to regulate land use, including setback distances, end quote. Bold Alliance held a webinar with their attorneys to review and discuss the letter. During Q&A, they were asked about county ordinances. The advice was to get an ordinance in place now. It can be amended as needed if more information comes to light. This is especially important for counties who do not yet have a proposed project. Carbon pipelines are dangerous. There was a CO2 rupture in Mississippi a couple years ago. CO2 is heavier than air, is a toxicant and asphyxiant. People up to a mile away were injured, some permanently. Personnel were not trained nor prepared to help them, and emergency equipment could not operate without oxygen, and the ambulances would not run. Pipeline companies are refusing to share emergency response plans or plume modeling. First responders are being told to only be responsible for blocking off roads and determining the wind direction until the company can get there and establish a hot zone. Summit claims CO2 won't hurt you unless the concentration is 50,000 parts per million, but OSHA won't let workers be exposed to 30,000 parts per million for more than 10 minutes. Companies are continuing to refuse to share plume modeling, showing how far CO2 could travel after a rupture. In the IUB hearing exhibit 641, John Abraham, a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, presented information. On page 25 of his report, it states, quote, what we learned from the Navigator Public Utilities Commission hearing is that Navigator's non-worst case scenario risk modeling for an 8-inch pipeline showed a hazard distance of 1,855 feet at 40,000 parts per million concentration of CO2. That is a third of a mile. Navigator's plume dispersion modeling supports this claim. The HGS hazard levels identify a scale of 1 to 4. 40,000 parts per million is a level 2 hazard that poses an, quote, immediate threat to life, could cause irreversible or delayed health effects, or interfere with the ability to escape, end quote. The whole route in my county is a level 2, except for those who live within 400 feet, like my neighbors, the Johnson family. They are a level 4, which gives them, quote, a significant likelihood of death, end quote, in only 10 minutes. Counties and cities are supposed to be able to pass local ordinances to establish setbacks from homes, schools, livestock, and city limits for future growth. Ordinances can establish fees and will protect those who don't get an option to sign an easement. Even if your county is not affected by one of these current projects, more will be coming. Every county needs to pass ordinances now before any permits are issued. Summit is taking advantage of weakly worded law that is unclear who has jurisdiction. PHMSA recently issued guidance that says state and local entities have the ability to write ordinances. Summit has sued multiple counties who have passed ordinances and have intimidated others not to. A January court date in Iowa will hear the Summit versus Shelby County case. This summer, an injunction was granted allowing Summit to not comply with the federal until the federal case is settled, which stops them from incurring fees and fines. PHMSA can't, Iowa won't, so the counties must. Summit is aggressively running ads in rural newspapers. They claim over and over that landowners are signing easements, therefore they must be in favor of the project. There could be a multitude of reasons why one would sign an easement. Some offers are very lucrative. Summit said they have invested over $4 million in just 13 miles of easements here in Montgomery County. The choice may have nothing to do with the landowner's personal support of the pipeline. This mailer was sent to farmers multiple times. How would you feel if you were told you would lose 85% of your income? Please continue to learn all you can about this issue. Become an advocate, speak up, and stand beside those who oppose the carbon pipeline boondoggle, regardless of party affiliation. Lobby for legislation that protects landowners and ask your local government to take action with local ordinances. Be a resource to others to better educate the public, and please be a ripple in the sea of information. Thank you for attending this evening and wanting to know more about the proposed carbon pipeline projects. Here's my contact information. I'll be taking questions at the end, and if you know other groups who would like a presentation, feel free to give me a call. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jen. Again, a wonderful set of slides that we're all probably going to want to go back to and revisit. I tried to write down some highlights, but I couldn't keep up. Our third presenter is from the state of Illinois. Pam Richard, Eco Justice Collaborative, is a land use and environmental planner by training and co-director of Eco Justice Collaborative, a nonprofit based in Champaign, Illinois. It was formed in 2008 to work for solutions to climate change that integrate environment, economic, and social justice. Within the last 20 months, Pam has helped found and now serves as the lead organizer for the Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines. This Illinois coalition consists of 11 nonprofits and over 100 landowners working to stop these pipelines. Welcome, Pam. We're looking forward to your presentation. It's all yours.
Thank you. And I too am pleased to be with you all this evening. There's been a lot of information already shared that's in my presentation, so I might be skipping a few slides and adding some additional information that maybe I hadn't intended to share with you tonight. One of the things I think that all of us who are organizing to stop CO2 pipelines find, in order to be successful, we're bridging the gap between political and ideological divide, right? So whether you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, believe in climate change, don't believe in climate change, we have found common ground in one respect around one thing, and that's CO2 pipelines, carbon capture, and carbon storage are bad, and they're being funded with your taxpayer dollars and mine, even though we don't want them. And I just wanted to say that from the outset, because I think that leads to a lot of the success that we're finding here in Illinois. We've talked about this. I think Peg did a great job talking about the three systems. I don't need to do that. I will say that, and I think this is alluded to as well, that Illinois does have that geology. You can see that it covers the Illinois Basin, which is the same footprint that the coal is found as well. And it really makes us a target for storage, a primary target. And we necessarily we do object to being the, quote, dumping ground for everybody's CO2 across the Midwest. This is not something we asked for, and it is not something we want to see pursued. We do have the largest, one of the largest coal plants in the country, Prairie State Energy, that is going to be sequestering carbon, capturing and sequestering carbon. And as an example of the water consumption that would be used for that process, I want to point out that they would require on an annual basis for capturing carbon as much water as is used on an annual basis by the residents of Ann Arbor, Michigan. So when we talk about potable water, we talk about water as a resource. I think it's really important to recognize, as both Jan and Peg have done, that this is probably one of the bigger problems as we look at this whole process. We know carbon capture has been a failure. Illinois had that famous FutureGen plant that was started in the era of George Bush and wasn't canceled until 2015, with a bunch of fits and starts and a lot of federal dollars thrown its way. All of these projects have been funded by your taxpayers. And the only project, the only coal fossil fuel carbon capture project that's operating today in North America is the one in Canada, and it's operating and capturing carbon at about 60% versus 90% that was promised, and yet it's doubled, and it's also doubled the price of electricity. And many of you are going to say, well, Pam, you're in Illinois, right? And isn't ADM in Illinois? And yes, it is. And isn't the ADM carbon capture sequestration project the one everybody looks up to, the one that captures ethanol successfully and has buried it in the ground for the past 11 years without a problem? And while that is true, it's only 11 years, and it takes a while, I think, for CO2 to prove whether or not it's going to successfully stay underground or not. It's also very small. It is not commercial scale. They have, Archer Daniels Midland has been able to successfully sequester 3.5 million metric tons of carbon over the past 11 years. And compare that to what's happening in our state for sequestration projects already under review by the US EPA. And you'll find that what's being proposed in our state with those other projects is 57 times that successfully stored by CO2, by ADM rather. So there's a huge difference in scale that I think we need to be talking about. Key concerns in our state with carbon capture. Again, we're talking about legislation. We're working on legislation now, and actually we'll have an updated bill ready to be going to what we call the Legislative Review Board in January. So that's coming up rather quickly, and it'll be introduced in February of this year. We know that carbon capture has not been effective, right? There are not adequate performance standards at the federal level or accounting measures either at the federal level, and certainly none exist at the state level to ensure CCS is an effective climate strategy. We know carbon capture could extend the life of heavily polluting facilities, but we're really concerned about what that pollution burden would be on EJ communities where most of our coal plants and natural gas plants in Illinois are located. And we talked about the water. And I think this has been emphasized already, but I do want you to take this away as a major takeaway here tonight. CCS investments could divert critical resources away not only from renewables, but also from energy efficiency, from technologies, I call them technologies like biological sequestration that can repair and expand our natural ecosystems that can function as carbon sinks. So we're coming out of the gate wrong here. What are we doing in our bill? Well, one of the things that I think is important here is the industry has said, oh, no problem. Not only can we capture carbon as a 90% rate, but we can actually go up to 100%. So we're going to say to them, okay, prove it, because as we have looked at other projects in the past, they have not achieved 90%. They have come nowhere near to achieving 90%. And even ADM is capturing their carbon at slightly higher than 50% at this point in time. We're going to do that life cycle analysis that I think Peg talked about. We want to take into account upstream and downstream emissions. We want to make sure that if you're going to do one of these projects, and that it will actually be net carbon negative. And then we're going to do an alternative analysis. Illinois doesn't have what Minnesota has, which is a process that it functions much like a environmental impact statement. But we're going to put one in there. You got to show us that you can't achieve the same results and do less harm and do it at less cost before you're allowed to go forward. One of the things we're concerned about is co-pollutants. Capture facilities they need more energy, and because they need more energy, they're going to either build a new facility or they're going to take energy from the grid, and that can increase dangerous air pollution emissions, especially particulate matter that we know here in our country, is really a great threat to human health. And of course, we want to have that water analysis. What are those impacts to our water, both in quantity and quality? And what are you going to do about limiting your water use during drought? ADM has an extensive water use agreement that they were required to enter into with the city of Decatur because, they were really drawing down water at such a rate. There was a problem in being able to meet the water needs of that community. And that's before they expand their carbon capture program, which they intend to do. And robust public engagement. A lot of what we're seeing, and this was alluded to by Jan, it's going on behind the scenes. Nobody's coming out in the daylight to say, here's what we're going to do. And we want to coordinate our project with you. We want to take the best ideas you have. We want to know where there's problems if we were to do it. And I think they're doing that because they know that they're going to run into trouble that way and might have trouble getting a project through, right? And with good reason. We specifically want to make sure that we've got our EJ communities having a voice in this process. So you've heard about the 3 projects, all 3 of them actually, and they're all here in Illinois. Navigator, as Jan and Peg both alluded to, was in fact canceled. I think that a lot of this work has to do with 2 things. In our state, we cannot do ordinances with setbacks without being preempted by the ICC, the Illinois Commerce Commission, that sets the route. So we've been out doing organizing, getting townships and municipalities and counties to adopt resolutions against the pipeline. We've been out there getting counties to intervene in the process. We've made sure that they stay true to their commitment to intervene when Navigator actually knocks on their door and says, we're going to offer you money so that you can support us and change your intervention agreement, and we really want you to drop that and work with us. So we've been out there. We've held meetings that have drawn as many as 500 people. So that's one thing that I think we've done well. The other thing we've done well, I think, is we've been able, with our educational and our landowner to landowner work, prevent Navigator from actually getting the easements it needed to build its pipeline. After over a year, they only had 14.8% of the easements that they needed. And that's because landowners were truly refusing to sign. And that's because they were being connected with farmers and other folks concerned about safety as part of our campaign. So the other thing I want to say about Navigator and Wolf 2 is that for whatever reason, they entered these processes, Navigator twice before the ICC, without having their ducks in a row. I do not understand how they could go forward without having all the commitments they needed for sequestration, for example. I do not understand why they would go forward without revealing their public safety and plume modeling information. They were not answering questions of safety put forward by the residents and the farmers and other landowners, and therefore who are intervening, and those who are making comments on the ICC docket. And therefore, Mark Maple, who is the case manager for Navigator, said, this project is not in the best interest of the public. PHMSA rules aren't out. Navigator's not waiting. Residents are concerned. Navigator can't get all the easements they need because of the safety concerns, because of concerns about eminent domain. This project is not in the public interest. And I think after receiving 2 recommendations of denial and a denial in South Dakota and trouble in Iowa, and headed for trouble everywhere else, they decided to withdraw. Similarly, Wolf Carbon Solutions withdrew after a recommendation of denial. Interestingly enough with them, they don't even have a contract agreement for carbon capture with ADM with whom they are partnering, nor do they have a binding agreement for a place to put their carbon with ADM with whom they are partnering. I think that's really kind of crazy. We aren't quite sure why they would even go forward without those required contractual agreements. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning here about Wolf that's different is they're the first of any of the pipelines I've experienced to date. And maybe there's others that could be talked about, maybe some that's different. But Wolf Carbon Solutions would have a spur. They didn't go into their ICC process with that. But they intend to have a spur that will go through the south side of Peoria and environmental justice community. It's a heavily populated community, and the spur would expose those residents to yet another pollution burden because a capture plant is right there, and a threat from the safety from the pipelines, a safety threat from the pipelines. So that makes them different. They are withdrawn, as somebody noted, I think Jan did. They're on their way back and right after the first of the year. And we think they're going to try and get squeaking through before PHMSA updates its rules. One Earth sequestration is little. It's only 7.3 miles long. I'll talk about that in a second. I guess I'm talking about it now. It's 7.3 miles, but we know from their application that they in fact are expecting to have 30 third-party users. We know they've oversized their pipeline for that purpose. Those users are probably going to come north and south of the One Earth plant here, and come from the east, north, south, and tap into the pipeline to go to sequestration just 7 miles away. But the majority owner of One Earth is the Rex American Resources Corporation, and they have 5 other plants. And they have said publicly they think that carbon sequestration is a great way to make their plants more sustainable, their ethanol plants more sustainable, and lower that carbon index, which will make them available for other tax credits. So we think this is the beginning of something larger and are keeping our eye on it. And then here in Illinois as well, our state was accepted along with Michigan and Indiana to be part of what is called the Midwest Alliance for Clean Hydrogen. If you know much about hydrogen, it's not all that clean, and it can include blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, which is made from natural gas, releases CO2, which will be captured, which will be put in a pipeline, which will be transported for sequestration. So that, I believe, is one of the things that we need to watch as well, that is leading to that massive projection of additional pipelines. I did want to spend just a minute just showing this video, just to say quickly, if you haven't seen it, it puts into perspective what a CO2 pipeline rupture is. It's just 60 minutes long. So I'm going to start it now, and it's a test video.
This video shows a rupture of a buried, dense phase carbon dioxide pipeline. The experiment was conducted in the safe environment of the DMVGL Spade Adam Testing and Research Centre to assess the consequences of such ruptures in terms of mass outflow, crater formation and dense gas dispersion. The viewer should note that the extent of the visible plume does not necessarily represent the extent of the dense gas hazard.
So that's what it looks like when a pipeline ruptured. And that was an 8-inch pipeline. And what you're seeing with Summit and Wolf are 20-inch diameter pipelines, much larger than what you saw in that test rupture. What you also saw was as it comes out cold, you can see it because it comes out at minus 109 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's essentially dry ice at that point. And then when it warms, that's when it begins to move. Jan already talked about this, so I don't need to talk about it again. Just note that that immediate danger to life and health standard is 4% concentration. And we did already talk about Satartia, but I did want to show this photo because when that explosion happened, when that rupture happened, it covered everything with ice, as you can see in this video. And it also created a crater 40 feet deep. These are not small happenings. They're devastating events if and when they happen. And all pipelines rupture, all pipelines leak. And the Pipeline Safety Trust has said that CO2 pipelines are more prone to rupture than oil and gas. Here's what Navigator was proposing for us. They were proposing to build their pipeline based on that level 4 that Jan talked about. I don't know how they could have gotten away with this, but the ICC doesn't necessarily look at these standards. They look at PHMSA to set those, to determine whether or not a pipeline has met the safety criteria. And the PHMSA only looks at the design and the construction and the operation. They don't look at setbacks. They don't look at routing at all. That's something we have to fix in our state. And this really would have placed Illinois residents in severe danger. So we do think that standard setting has to be both transparent, because Wolf has refused to allow anybody to look at its plume modeling except the ICC, and Navigator refused as well, but released it accidentally. So that's how we have it. So the other things that I think I wanted to say is eminent domain is a big thing, I think, across all the Midwestern states receiving pipelines. But, funding of emergency services, we all have these little volunteer fire departments that don't have the money, that don't have the capacity, that don't have the equipment that they need. That's a really big concern. And that don't even have an understanding of what CO2 pipelines are until recently, when they've been talking somewhat to our organizing groups, and they've also been talking to Navigator about them as well. This slide shows gives you an example of the breadth of organizing we've been doing, and I think explains what I said at the get-go about how we're going about this and pressuring counties to intervene. And they've been doing that, and that gives our local governments a voice in the process. And we formed 2 landowner corporations so that landowners too could have a voice in this process, because in our state, that's the only way you can do it. I can't walk in without paying an attorney, getting a petition to intervene, and going through what is essentially a trial-like process with discovery and testimony and evidentiary hearings. I can't do that without an attorney. And so we had to form a landowner group and have formed 2 of them, one for Wolf and one for Navigator for that purpose, and are in the process of forming a 3rd for One Earth. So guardrails, boy, I think this is pretty evident here. Geohazards, we've got mine subsidence happening here in Illinois that's different than other places. And we also have earthquakes. So we need a geohazard analysis. And we talked about safe setbacks. It's important to use the most precise modeling, not the fast modeling and the Aloha modeling that pipeline developers are doing. And again, I want to emphasize, we got to have public involvement before anybody goes forward. So this shows, as I move into the last piece here, how Illinois is in fact ground zero for CCS. We have 6 counties with 22 Class 6 well applications combined that are before the US EPA now. But that doesn't include counties like Livingston and Piatt and Tazewell County and Sangamon County and St. Clair County and other counties that I might be forgetting, that Navigator and Wolf are busy right now getting, and One Earth as well, trying to get leases signed. So we really are ground zero, and it seems like every week I learn of a new project. It's really exhausting to try to keep up with this. CO2 can leak. These are the pathways. There's no guarantee it will stay underground. And you already heard how if it mixes with water, it forms carbonic acid and can contaminate water. We've got tons of abandoned oil and gas wells, as many of the other states in the Midwest do as well. We don't even know where they all are. Our own Illinois Department of Natural Resources admits they don't know where they all are. But even plugged wells are at risk because they can be, the cement can be eroded. And they provide a pathway, as happened in Wyoming when an abandoned oil well leaked and a school had to be shut down for months. So CO2 leaking, we're going to look into that. It's moving rapidly toward the surface, toward the cap rocks. A geologist that we've talked to says, well, it's moving from one confinement zone into another. I don't know that that was expected. Need to learn more because that could put pressure on the cap rock. But it's also moving laterally, and it's moving under areas beyond the area of review that was approved and is considered to be trespass for folks who have not agreed to have CO2 under their feet. And we've seen natural gas storage field leaks in Illinois. Here are 3 of them. And one of them happened, but with a corroded well, and the natural gas actually got into the Mahomet Aquifer and contaminated it, source of water. This is a sole source, EPA sole source designated aquifer. And we've got multiple proposals for sequestration in both the recharge area and under the aquifer. We're really concerned about that and are working our darndest to stop it at the local level via permits, and also will be there as those US EPA public hearings are held to weigh in. Doing a lot of work in this area right now. Seismic areas, yes, a CO2 pipeline can be affected by a natural earthquake, but so can a sequestration area. And when you inject CO2, that can also trigger earthquakes that are large enough to break the cap rock or seal. So when that happens, you've got a path of escaping for CO2. We have some unanswered questions here in Illinois, really foundational questions like, who owns the pore space into which the carbon dioxide is injected? That's not settled here in Illinois. Who owns the carbon dioxide after it's injected? And who should be responsible for ensuring it stays underground or addresses a leak or well blowout if one occurs? Well, industry will tell you that should be the state. So that means our taxpayer dollars would be used to subsidize these projects to begin with. And then at the end of their life, after 30 years, if the industry has its way, it'll be turned over to the state for the next 100 years or more until that CO2 becomes stable. Again, something we're fighting. So here are some of the guardrails we're looking for. We want stronger regulations in Class 6 wells, and we're allowed to do that. Stronger monitoring. We want it to be make sure that it stays with the developer and that there are financial assurances put up front, recognizing that not every company is going to be around after 100 years, right? So that there's money available to pay for and take care of the monitoring and address any concerns that might happen. And I think, again, you can read what's on the slide here. We want to make sure that the the confining zone is actually is as they say it will be, and we've got the additional modeling that we'll be asking for. We're going to be talking about not intersecting with a potable water water aquifer like the Mahomet, and we want to make sure that we are not looking at an area that contains abandoned wells, mine shafts, quarries, or other features that can serve as escape paths. And again, we need to have robust public involvement all through the whole CCS process. So we got this bill. It's going through an update now. We've been negotiating with industry. I found myself on the negotiating team representing farmers and the grassroots essentially. It's been an interesting project. We have agreed on two things. One, that pore space should belong to the owner, the surface owner, and that two, industry in Illinois is not interested in enhanced oil recovery, for which I do not understand, because Illinois has a lot of oil that can be recovered. But right now they're okay with banning enhanced oil recovery from this bill. And that, other than that, they agree with nothing. So we have our work cut out to do here. What I will say that is, I'm going to close with something that happened today that's really, really exciting. We've been having a lot of excitement here in Illinois. Cancellation, motion to deny Navigator, Navigator canceled, Wolf withdraws. And today at the Illinois Farm Bureau annual meeting, the Farm Bureau, who supports CO2 pipelines, agreed today to support legislation that does not use eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. And that's something that's in our bill. Zero eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. We probably won't end there, but we got the Farm Bureau supporting us. That's huge. They are a big lobby group in Illinois. And the second thing they agreed to do was to support a moratorium on CO2 pipelines until PHMSA passes its regulations. So it's rulemaking, and it actually implements it. So this is huge. And so we have our work cut out to do. We have to continue the education, talk to our legislators. The Democratic leaders in Illinois tend to favor carbon capture and sequestration. And Illinois, with its Prairie Research Institute, has received a lot of money to study CCS and to begin pilot projects. ADM was a pilot project. The power plant in Springfield is another one. And so we got our work cut out for us. So if you are on this call and you are in Illinois, it would be really great if you could reach out to me and say, I'm interested in helping you pass that bill, because we're going to need all the help that we can as we move forward this next year. So with that, I will end it and open. I know we have questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pam. I want to quickly, we've got a few questions. I want to ask two. The first one for all of you, but maybe it's Pam and Jan. You both mentioned reservoirs where this sequestered CO2 is going to go. And one of you mentioned them being saline reservoirs. And I think Jan, that was you, wasn't it?
No, it's Pam. Pam talked about saline.
So
yeah.
Are those created reservoirs from fracking? How do you get a saline reservoir in the Midwest?
It's our natural geology. So you go down 7,000 in our state, you can go down 6,000 to 7,000 feet, and you hit an area before you hit the basement, the crystalline rock. Above that is a brine solution. And the brine solution is like located between little tiny rocks of sand. So this is called the Mount Simon Sandstone Formation. And the idea here is you can inject the CO2 and it goes into those little crevices between the little tiny grains of sand. But what they don't tell you is it displaces the brine. And the brine then becomes buoyant, and it becomes, there's pressure that happens when something is displaced like that. And that, plus the high pressure the CO2 is injected at, it creates a lot of pressure concerns to the whole process. But it's a natural formation.
Okay, appreciate that. And toward the end of your comment, it was striking that you said you have the Illinois Farm Bureau talking with you. I think you said they're going to support not allow any use of eminent domain. Did I get that clear?
You did, and I'm just beaming.
Okay, and you're also going to support a moratorium. that
Yes.
I wonder if the conversations are happening in Iowa and Minnesota with the Farm Bureau, Pega and Jan.
Farm Bureau in Iowa supported a bill for a 90% threshold to say if you have 90% of the voluntary easements, you should be able to get eminent domain. I'm not completely on board with that. Yeah, something's better than nothing, but that's not the only thing that we should be looking at.
Did they support any effort toward a moratorium?
I have not heard that for sure.
Okay.
I
Peg, what
can't
about Minnesota?
So Minnesota's in a unique situation compared to the 4 other states in the Summit project because we don't have eminent domain for this project. And we found that the Farm Bureau and Farmers Union both were maybe more supportive because it was about landowner rights, and maybe came in a little bit more for those reasons. So while we tend to have and work with Farmers Union more as an organization, they've not yet publicly signed on to anything related to this campaign. We do have a lot of landowners though, and I think I just want to highlight something that Pam lifted up when she started this, and I think Jan alluded to it too. This whole project has been a really interesting way to bring people together because it's really around property rights and how people are being treated, and more so than it is like political affiliations. And we've certainly seen that in Minnesota. You know, there's all kinds of people that are coming to the table with concerns about this project from all different walks of life and backgrounds. And that's kind of been the beauty of, or is always the beauty of organizing, I think, when you're doing grassroots organizing.
Yes, thank you. Some questions from the audience. What's the difference between hydrogen capture and carbon capture? And I think, Pam, you addressed that briefly.
I did. And there are a whole host of different kinds of hydrogen, and some are considered to be better than others, and some processes are different than others. The one I was talking about specifically is called blue hydrogen, that is made from natural gas. And that process generates CO2 as a byproduct that then is captured, that then will be transported, and then will be put into the ground. So that's the one that we're watching out for. And we know one of the new gas plants that's being constructed in Illinois is considering that. That's happening near Springfield, our state capital.
Rebecca wants to know about recent successes of the farmers in Illinois who won the fight. What kind of strategies could be used in Minnesota? What can translate from Illinois to Minnesota?
Oh, wow. Well, we had a multi-pronged campaign, and one of our campaigns was recognizing we had to, I'm going to say, neutralize I hope that doesn't sound too violent, the Farm Bureau, because they were on the side of industry. They've been on the side of industry because they see CO2, carbon capture and sequestration as critical to the livelihood of ethanol. So we embarked upon a sub-campaign. And so in Illinois, we have county farm bureaus. I suspect other states have the same model. And the county farm bureaus were easily convinced that the larger state was not concerned about property rights and about public safety. And so it was a grassroots pressure campaign that led to today's event. And so again, a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls to the counties so that they felt they could go to this meeting this past weekend and say, I'm hearing from our farmers in X County. And that's what we used.
Thank you. Rebecca wants to know about, I thought only governments could exercise eminent domain. Are you saying that these private companies are allowed to do so? Jan, can you answer that?
Typically, what we know eminent domain to be used for is things like roads, bridges, electrical transmission lines, things that benefit the public as a whole. However, the Dakota Access Project kind of changed things in Iowa. They were given the ability to use eminent domain. Their project, I think, only needed to use, it was 20% or less, I think. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. But Summit does not have, they have 75% or so. Summit's going to need more eminent domain than what these other projects have done. And it's a real concern. This is a really slippery slope. If we start letting private companies benefit from eminent domain, there will be no end to it. And
who gives Summit, say, who gives a pipeline company in Iowa that authority?
The Iowa Utilities Board. That's part of their application.
Okay.
Is they have to request the use of eminent domain as part of their application. Summit and Navigator both requested it. Wolf did not.
So I heard that Illinois has support for no eminent domain usage. I've heard that Iowa looks like might require a 90% voluntary easement before eminent domain can be used. What's happening in Minnesota, Peg?
There is no eminent domain in Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't allow for eminent domain for private projects at this point.
Well, supposedly that's what happened. That's what was true in Iowa.
Well, they would
you don't.
they would have to go to the legislature and change our laws in order to do it. And quite honestly, it doesn't mean that they won't, right? Because we're seeing that with the Forest Service right now. They're trying to change the laws around what we understand to be protections for our public lands. So nothing's off the table. You can't just rest on your laurels. You have to be aware of what's going on. But currently, right now, they haven't met the test, and so that's not the case.
I've got to switch over to another question here. Let me see where I'm going. Okay, that's not working. A longer question from Rosemary for Pam. Thank you for showing the deadly effect of people and livestock breathing with the CO2 replaces oxygen. Could you explain the effect on combustion engine too, wherein cars and ambulance and fire engines may not function? She said, thank you for all excellent presentations. I'm sure you're going to get that from a lot of people. But how does that, we saw slides about how quickly it affects a Homo sapien. How quickly does it affect combustion engines?
I don't know that I don't have the answer to how quickly it does, but I think it's fairly quick because the oxygen is required for internal combustion engines. And I'm really glad that question was brought up because I neglected to say that, because when that happens, you can't self-rescue, right? How do you drive away with your car? We know from Satartia that there were 3 men who had been on a fishing trip that smelled, because in Satartia there was hydrogen sulfide, I think, mixed in with the CO2. So they smelled that rotten egg smell, like what's happening, got in their cars to drive away and they couldn't leave. So they closed up their windows and were found unconscious and nearly left for dead. They really were nearly left for dead because on the other end, the emergency responders didn't have the vehicular power they needed to get in. So they used their ATMs to get as far as they could, walk the rest of the way, got a lot of that rescue was done of that town on foot. So that's a real concern. And that's one reason why, the little fire departments in our state and everywhere else, they don't have electric vehicles, right? They'd have to be funded for that. They don't have air supply respirators either. But yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing it up.
There's been a lot of discussion in Iowa about the cost to local government emergency services, and a lot of people are proposing that these pipelines should be required to provide not just the training, but the equipment needed. Where do you all 3 see that going?
That's part of our bill. I'm just going to say that and I'll be quiet. That's part of our bill. So it's essential.
And Jan, where do you see it going in Iowa?
I agree that it's essential. Summit talks a big game. They promise they'll give everybody what they've told local supervisors and EMSs, that they will provide you with what you need. However, in the hearing testimony at the Iowa Utilities Board, that was not what they testified.
Okay, we all heard this news this week. Indiana's legislature just passed a law to allow eminent domain by a specific company for CCS. How do you three see that impacting the work you're doing in each of your states? Peg, I'll start with you because you really don't have eminent domain. Do you think that'll change people's mind in Minnesota?
No, I don't think it. I think it'll just anger them more. And I think you'll get even more resistance. People are they don't see a public good. You know, Summit's lining their pockets with billions of taxpayer dollars. It's not like there is no public good. It's not a climate solution. You can't argue that. And if you look at the narrative that Summit's putting out there, they've changed their messaging. They're no longer saying it's a climate solution because they know that it's not and they can't prove that it is. So I don't know what will happen, but I don't feel that it's going to become eminent domain.
Jan, any impact in Iowa?
Well, I would like to say South Dakota said no, North Dakota said no. Other states are saying no. So what if Indiana says yes?
A comment from Mary Jo, and she says, more of a comment. I believe the Mount Simon Hinckley aquifer is our deepest aquifer in Minnesota. Our DNR limits the use of this water because it's considered our drinking water supply of last resort. Is the Mount Simon Hinckley being used for injection in Illinois, Pam?
I think our formation is different. So I'm not aware of the Mount Simon Hinckley that's being discussed as being something in Illinois, but it's the Mount Simon aquifer, and there is a zone that could be considered to be a last resort drinking water. And yes, it's being injected in that location.
I saw another question I wanted to get to. Okay. It sounds like these pipelines make sense financially due to the support they're getting from the federal government. Are there lobbying efforts that aim at changing federal policy? Pam, you're nodding your head. So
yeah, there are.
Where do we go at the federal level? Who do we talk to?
Food and Water Watch, and I think those of us on this list probably have that same information. Jim Walsh is really leading the charge at coordinating legislators to ask the Biden administration. They did a sign-on letter, for example. There's been multiple sign-on letters to help get education across to Congress and get people to support a moratorium for CO2 pipelines. So that's been happening. The Center for Biological Diversity is engaged in that too. Here in Illinois, we've been talking to Tammy Duckworth. We've been talking to Senator Durbin. We're encouraging people to talk to their Congress persons about this as a way to help educate them and get them on our side. Because honestly, as I said to, Dick Durbin's a pretty powerful guy. I happened to be able to talk with him. And I said, you have left us unprotected. You have no idea how your actions at the federal level have filtered down to the state and to the local level. And you need to start looking at that piece.
I'll give each of you a few minutes for a summary comment. Let's go in backwards. So Pam, why don't you go first?
Summary piece. Well, I think what we've heard here today is that CCS is not an effective climate solution. It's being paid for by your tax dollars and mine, and brings with it a whole host of concerns about safety and property rights. And the only way we're going to stop this is to have everybody engaged in the fight. And when we all participate, we can win and we can make a difference. I have heard by sociologists that it takes just a little, a smidgen of people, like 8 to 10% of people to tip the balance. So, if we all did something, I think it could make a huge difference. And we've been seeing some successes here. So let's keep working together.
Okay, thank you, Jan.
Well, ditto to everything Pam just said, but also, when it comes to the climate change solution, the saying, a leopard doesn't change its spots. What would make a climate denier suddenly care and want to do something about it? Could it be $12 billion?
Mm-hmm.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Okay, Peg.
Okay, it's really unfair to have to go last. I just have to say.
Sorry about this. Someone had to do it.
I know. Well, I would agree with all of this. And I think another thing I would just like to say, and I'm sure many of you are already doing things towards this, but this is a carbon Ponzi scheme, right? We're just moving carbon around. We're not changing behaviors. We're trying to keep our privilege of living in this country and the privilege of being able to do what we want, when we want, and how we want. And unless we start changing our personal behavior practices, we're not going to see reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, because this is really a way for the fossil fuel industry to have another ninth life. And the only way to stop that is to move to electrification and renewable options. And so do everything in your power in your communities to support that and lift that up, and make the personal changes yourself that you can do and manage, and transition your own self and be a role model for your network.
Excellent. You've given me a new phrase, a carbon Ponzi scheme. I really like that. That's a catcher. Well, again, thank each of you. There's just lots of comments in the chat here. Everyone is really appreciating this. You all did an outstanding job. As I said, I'm going to have to go back and look at those slides again. A couple of people said, whoa, wait a minute, one of those slides went too fast. But Gretchen, a wonderful communications person, will have them up very quickly on our website. And again, it's available to anyone. We really encourage local leagues to use these videos of these webinars as a local program topic. Again, UMR's focus is water quality and water quantity in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And so there's a lot of excellent information on our website. And also, anyone is welcome to these presentations in our area or even outside of. So follow the information about upcoming events and upcoming topics. Thank you all. Thank
Mary
you all
Ellen,
for being. Yes, Jan.
Somebody did ask about the Tipton meeting on Thursday night. It is.
We got it to her.
You got it. Okay, great.
Yes. We got that information to her.
The Tipton courthouse.
Right. So appreciate that. I'm sure she's going to show up. So again, take a look at our website, and don't hesitate to take some of these webinars to your local league. And again, Peg, Pam, and Jan, I just can't thank you enough. You went above and beyond any expectations I think that we had. It was just wonderful. And thank you, Gretchen. I'll say good night to all and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.